Honourable member for question himself.
I'm obliged to you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As always, I listened to the honourable member who introduced what is before this Parliament today. And I always remind this chamber that I try to take notes as faithfully as I can do. And I took several notes reflecting the speech of the honourable member for St. James South. Maybe I would have been disappointed if I did not record the usual cliches, fit for purpose, and things of that nature. And the honourable member rather curiously began by making reference to the ministerial statement which preceded her own introduction by a few seconds. Curiously also, the honourable member analogized this present exercise, or the proposed exercise of the corporatization of a government department, with the transition, as the honourable member termed it, from Sewell to Grantley Adams. And of course the references to the airport. And without saying it, of course, the references to modernization. And of course, modernization is a noble enterprise. And I record the honourable member to have said that this corporatization allows the unhindering, that's not the honourable member's words, these are my words. These words represent my interpretation of what the honourable member would have been saying, that the corporatization of this government department unhinders the ability to register businesses. And the honourable member is quoted again as saying that around the world there are trillions of dollars looking for opportunities for investment. And how does Business Barbados affect economic growth? Now, these are rather ambitious statements, and this is a rather ambitious objective placed on a government department which shall become a corporation to attract the trillions of dollars that exist across the world. I rather think we have other government departments or other bodies of the state already charged with those responsibilities. But it is a rather ambitious mandate placed on a department which beg your pardon.
Member for St. James South.
Sedation. The honourable member may not have taken quite all the notes he needed. I spoke of Foreign Affairs, Invest Barbados, and all the entities that will seek out the business. That Business Barbados, its job is, once we attract it and it comes, to secure it. He might have missed that part of the speech, so I just wanted him not to fall into gross error.
Thanks for your elucidation. Remember?
I am sincerely indebted for that elucidation. Now, I was about to say that I wonder if one should place, and I accept the point of elucidation, but having admitted, the honorable member having admitted that she would have placed those mandates and responsibility elsewhere, the staff at this new corporation will now be relieved to hear that it is not their sole and or entire business to attract the trillions of dollars that are around the world looking for opportunities for investment. I can speak to, professionally, of course, I can speak to the history of the department and to explain to the honorable member and to this country why those persons who presently work there would be so relieved, because they have come under a lot of public criticism. And I trust that criticism, and I speak with the other side on this, I trust that that criticism will not follow them into this new entity. So I, like them, would now be relieved to hear that those lofty responsibilities are not now transferred from other departments of this state onto them. Reference was made to, and I'm going to go through the notes that I took from the honorable member's speech before I come to the substance of my contribution. The honorable member made reference to the loan that was announced yesterday with some applause for the government. I think another $500 million. And since the honorable member has raised it, I don't believe, Your Honor, that you will deny me the opportunity to speak to it as well. And Barbadians went to bed last night and woke up this morning hearing that this country is now further indebted, except that the honorable member for St. James South considers it a moment of rejoicing. My own view is that Barbados now seems defined not by its capacity to produce, but by its ability to attract lenders. I don't know if our pride now lies in our ability to attract lenders. Barbadians may legitimately ask the question, where is our industry? And where is the industry that will repay all of these loans? But I don't wish to digress. I don't wish to burden the honorable member's contribution with matters that may not belong to her and may belong to another minister to whom she referred in her presentation. Whoever is the parliamentary representative for the constituency that contains Bridgefield may have sat with some anguish when the honorable member, in a rather broad presentation, said we have spent $78 million on roads. And that person, that representative, that parliamentary representative for the constituency that contains Bridgefield Road may have sat with some anguish and wondered why a portion of that $78 million could not have reached Bridgefield. But I said before, and I'm going to say it again, ma'am, under your presidency today of this chamber, that the roads that were paved were cricket roads or Kensington roads, so that while we come to this chamber today and we speak about inefficiencies in government departments, I want to remind the honorable member for St. James South that there has been grievous inefficiency attending the matter of road paving, which the honorable member now tells us reached the sum of $78 million. And the people in Bridgefield, who live in Bridgefield, and those who traverse Bridgefield, and those who tell me that they avoid Bridgefield in trying to get home, they spend larger sums on fuel for their cars because they do not wish to spend additional sums on suspensions and shocks and so on. But I do not digress from what is before the chamber today. These are matters that were referred to by the honorable member, and therefore you, ma'am, will not deny me the opportunity to give direct responses. And one of the penultimate quote that I noted, the honorable member said, "We build a platform for attracting business." The honorable member will not hear me disagree with that, since the department, when we go to other countries, when we consider the situation in other countries, and I know there is rather private admiration. I'm not going to use the word envy. A lot of people who think they envy people really admire them. So that there is some admiration for the jurisdictions of Cayman Islands and Turks and Caicos in terms of their ability to attract businesses because of speed, because of efficiencies. And the honorable member, if she intended to focus on that, she is correct that we need a platform, or we need to establish that platform for attracting business. The question that will be asked ultimately of this government by this legislative initiative today is whether it will be said in the future that the government built that platform for attracting business. And I think the honorable member refers to international business, largely speaking. And while referring to international business, with all of its lucrative contributions to this economy, the government will not wish to be heard to say that there is any neglect of local business, because local business also is important in terms of national morale and creating opportunities for young people who are here, who wish to be self-employed. And my last quote from the honorable member was that she said, "Business Barbados can make or break our investment strategy." And I am prepared to hold the government to that. In the fullness of time, will it be said that Business Barbados, which we legislate today, which the government legislates today, will it be said that it has made this country's investment strategy, or will it unhappily be said to have broken this government's investment strategy? And we hold the government to what it has promised. Now, those are my responses to direct statements made by the honorable member for St. James South. I wish now, Your Honor, to use some of the experience that I have in the law. I will not conceal myself behind a bushel. I will not be an exponent of any false modesty in here. Of all the lawyers that come in here, I'm the most senior. I've been doing this for 40 years. I speak with authority on the law. There are dentists in here, who are among the best dentists in Barbados. There are economists in here who have some merit. There are managers in here who have merit. And I will not be accused of false modesty. I am going to go into this act today, Your Honor, and to teach. And oh yes, that's where we all begin. And the chair, the Honorable Deputy Speaker reminds me that it all begins with teachers. And therefore, Your Honor, the fault is mine in failing to acknowledge teachers. And from all reports, you have been the best, or you have been among the best of them. And you don't have to teach in a tertiary institution to be considered the best. You took them from their infancy and made them into young adults and good adults. And so therefore, Your Honor, permit me to use my experience to give an exposition on this legislation that comes to the Parliament today. Now, it is normally the duty of a court, if a matter comes before the court, to give interpretation to legislation that has come before the Parliament. In other words, a lawsuit arises out of this legislation, and it is the judge that has to give interpretation to that legislation. In other words, he's asking, what did Parliament intend? What did Parliament mean? And I pause. There are also good doctors in here. I don't want to exhaust the list, but there are good doctors in here. And they will not hide their light under a bushel. Today, there's a lawyer speaking. Please let him be heard, Madam Deputy Speaker. And so, when a court is trying to interpret an act of Parliament, it may go to something they call the long title. This legislation seems not to contain a long title. A long title is that portion of legislation which explains its purpose, so that for some reason this legislation is deficient in that regard. So what do we do? As a Parliament and as an opposition doing a critique of this legislation, and I'm entitled to do critiques. And I will not relent in doing critiques of the government's work. This is not personal engagement. I left here last week wondering at the extent of personal engagement. And I will resist any urge or temptation, and there's none at my age and stage in life. You attack me personally, down my back, down my impervious back, and I go home and come back today. I don't come in here to attack anybody personally. I shouldn't. It is beneath the standards of this chamber. So please, Your Honor, let me proceed. I'm so glad you're here today. Now, every bill, this is the bill, gives explanation to the bill that will become an act of Parliament. Here's what that section of the bill says. Now, I read this because what is written here will not appear in the instrument when it becomes an act of Parliament and when it becomes the law of Barbados. So what I'm reading here is for the guidance of this Parliament, not for the guidance of a court, not for the guidance of a public, because after this becomes law, what I read here now will not appear within the instrument. Let me read it though, Your Honor. An act to establish a body corporate to be known as Business Barbados by coordinating and carrying out functions in relation to specified corporate and intellectual property enactments and to provide for related matters. Now, having read that, it speaks in English. I can read it a second time and try to understand what it is saying. I can read it a second time and try to get the essence of it. And so that it will not bypass you, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to try to read it again to see if you can extrapolate some meaning from it. Permit me. I know the rules, the standing orders and so on. There are a lot of experts in here on standing orders. Well, ask the experts to allow me to repeat this, because this is important. An act to establish a body corporate to be known as Business Barbados by coordinating and carrying out functions in relation to specified corporate and intellectual property enactments and to provide for related matters. I've read it a second time, ma'am, and you and I may still have some difficulty as to precisely what it means. So let us bypass that and go to the short title. Now, when a bill has a section that explains, and that explanation remains vague, you may go to the long title. And generally speaking, long titles don't remain vague. They're telling you what this legislation is about. Legislation is not an instrument intended to speak to lawyers or judges. Legislation speaks to the public writ large. It speaks to everybody. That's why they write it in English. And so, the short title, if the explanation to the bill is deficient, and if the bill, which will become an act of parliament, is deficient in terms of a long title, let us go to the short title. And the short title reads, as short titles read, it reads with brevity, this act may be cited as the Business Barbados Act 2024. All well and good. So in a few hours, we will have a Business Barbados Act. But what is its purpose? I may then have to go back to what the Honourable Member for St. James South said, and I quoted her, in saying that after this act is passed, maybe we will be more attractive we as Barbados will become more attractive as an allure for the trillions of dollars that are looking for opportunities for investment. And with this new legislation, we may even find ourselves in an environment in which economic growth is affected. And that this legislation will become that platform for attracting business. Historically, this department, we used to call it corporate affairs years ago. And as societies develop and modernize and business becomes more sophisticated and modernized, added to corporate affairs was intellectual property, because intellectual property represents a vast component of property which may be owned by persons, human or corporate. So it became the term CIPO. That was the acronym, Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office. But I said all of that to say that historically this government department was run by a lawyer. And that lawyer was a registrar as part of the established public service of this country. This is to give a historical account of that department, which has been so pilloried by some members of the public. And it used to be run by a lawyer who I believe became the Registrar of Corporate Affairs. So that lawyer was a lawyer. She was functioning, and I say she because in latter years it has, with the preponderance of females coming to the bar at the not at the expense, but in larger numbers than males. A lot of these departments have now tended to be headed by ladies because there are more female lawyers than there are male lawyers. And that lawyer had to be a manager of a department, and she had to be a lawyer, so that the functions were dual. And nothing could leave that department unless that lawyer, unless that manager of that department, lawyer manager happening to be the same person, gave final approval. I think they used to actually sign the document or delegated someone to sign. Now, what drew my attention was when the Honourable Member for St. James South said that Sections 13 and 14 of this Act, yes, Sections 13 and 14 of this Act establishes quasi-judicial functionaries. Not her words precisely, but I'm giving interpretation to what the Honourable Member said, that quasi-judicial functionaries are established under this Act, and she's correct. Because when the department used to be headed, as it is today, this very minute, when it was headed by a lawyer, by a registrar, by a manager, but essentially by a lawyer who was called a registrar, that person exercised a quasi-judicial function. The Honourable Member is correct. Like the Fair Trading Commission, they exercise a quasi-judicial function, except that last week in here I heard that it was the government that gave a decision in relation to the light and power rate increase. I heard that in here last week. I have it on record. Go on YouTube and you can see it. We all thought that the Fair Trading Commission used to exercise the quasi-judicial function of giving rate increases. But a boast was made in here last week that it was the government that gave it. And when the time comes, I am going to take the people of Barbados to other literature, to other statements made by subordinate ministers, which prove and confirm that the government may well have had some involvement in that decision, which is going to cause Barbadians to pay higher light bills. But let us not digress, Your Honor. I was saying that the Honourable Member for St. James South was correct when she indicated to this chamber and to this country that Sections 13 and 14 of the proposed new legislation establish quasi-judicial functionaries. Beg your pardon, ma'am. Now, this act becomes problematic. That is, you may say that is a personal and professional opinion, which I can express quite blandly, but you, ma'am, would call upon me to prove it. Let us go to sections 13 and 14 as indicated by the Honourable Member for St. James South. And it speaks to the functions of the registrar. The registrar is responsible for administering and ensuring compliance with this act and the specified enactment set out in the first schedule. B, the registrar is responsible for advising the chief executive officer and the board on legal matters relating to the specified enactments referred to at paragraph A, the preceding paragraph to which I referred. And C, this one is rather curious. The registrar is responsible for instituting legal proceedings in matters relating to breaches of the specified enactments referred to in paragraph A after consultation with the board, so that this legislation is now fixing the registrar with the status of being a party to legal proceedings if he or she thinks that the need arises. Rather curious, but I wouldn't delay you with that, Your Honor. D, the registrar is responsible for doing any other act or thing required to be done by the chief executive officer. Now, this is where the department becomes so differently and fundamentally and substantially constituted. As I said, ma'am, I traced the history. The registrar, in layman's terms, in ordinary parlance, he or she was the boss. It was a legal department, whatever we think of it, and whatever the Honorable Member for St. James South thinks of it, this was a legal department. This was a department that was given registration, and not only registration, but life and legal validity to corporations, to entities. And so you had a lawyer running the department. And I am not aware that this department will depart from those duties. It will remain a department that gives life to corporate entities. That is substantially what will be its purpose, its continued purpose. But now we have inserted into this department a chief executive officer. A chief executive officer. And that chief executive officer, within the organizational structure, is the boss of the person who used to head the legal department. Unless, of course, the government proposes to make one of those lawyers former registrar or deputy registrar, unless this government proposes to make one of them the CEO. We're hearing echoes of BTMI. We're hearing echoes of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. We're hearing echoes of hope, in which this government has seen it fit in a country filled with educated people to recolonize our state institutions. In the event that I'm misunderstood, mine is a voice in defense of education in this country. Mine is a voice in defense of the educated young people in this country. Mine is a voice in defense of the educated young people in this country who are no less competent nor qualified than anybody who is brought in to recolonize these bodies of the state. And I repeat, with a warning to the government that hearing the echoes of BTMI, Hope, and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, if you're going to name a CEO, find one of the 10,000 people who are well qualified in Barbados, who are as well qualified as the 30 of us who believe that we are well qualified to come in here and represent people. Yet we don't believe that the 10,000 young people out there are qualified to run state corporations in this country. Because every time we're naming a CEO, I remember the episode with BTMI. The only thing they didn't say about him is that he was God. Don't know if he came like a thief in the night, but he came. And no Minister of Tourism in this country within the last 6 years would tell you that he delivered any glad tidings. Came quietly. You know, nobody remembers him. You know, nobody thinks of him. But he came to this country in a blaze of glory. And this is not personal. I met him. This is a principal position in defense of our institution of education. And this government continues to demonstrate to the people of Barbados that it has no confidence in the people of Barbados. I haven't departed from this legislation, ma'am. This legislation is providing for a CEO to sit atop a registrar, or 2 or 3. I asked again, will this government promote one of those registrars to the office of CEO, or will we again have the return of these super people? They've heard me before quote a member of the government who said that we're looking for the best brains and the best minds. I mean, I said it before and I'm going to say it again. I have never heard such self-deprecation. I have never heard a statement of worse self-negation. That you justify an appointment of somebody you know nothing or little about. And you tell the country you are looking for the best minds. What is the best mind? Where is it made? Where is it made, ma'am? Somewhere that mankind has never gone? Mars? Because we went to the moon. So the best minds are not up there. They're getting these best minds from somewhere. Well, go up to the QEH today. It's not personal, but I must have courage in doing this job. I must have courage. And I must ask the people of this country if the Hope Corporation is any better run than any of these 29 people in this government could run their constituencies. They're well qualified. The people say that. The people say to all of us, we want you. And we believe ourselves well qualified to do this work. And we can't look at another Barbadian who put us in this position and say to him that he is also well qualified to head the QEH or to head Hope or to head the BTMI at the time. And I must come in here and skin my teeth when the week comes. Because I'm looking for popularity. Well, I don't want any popularity. Principle, Your Honor. Principle. And so mine is a warning to this government that when it establishes Business Barbados, this is early warning. Treat this as an early warning system. Find a national of this space called the Caribbean. Find a national of this space from Jamaica down to Guyana, since we are CARICOM. Find one and stop this practice of national self-negation in which you're telling the young people in this country that they're not fit. Bachelors and masters and PhDs. And you importing these people. And again, it's not a personal attack. It's not a personal attack, but we have children too. And one day we will have grandchildren too, who will repay the loans. And great-grandchildren. What account will we give to them? What will we say to them that we did while we were on this business? That we exported the leadership of our important state institutions to certain people? That's what we're going to say to them? Treat this government as an early warning that I bring attention to Business Barbados, which intends to hire and to employ a chief executive officer, that chief executive officer must come from within this Caribbean space. This is not nationalist bigotry. This is a recognition of our worth as a people. And we have spent too much time denying to our people their worth. And so I come back to the technicalities of the act. That was an intervention designed to give warning to this government that the people are watching you. And that if you want the people to highly regard you as a government, reciprocate with some high regard for them in terms of their competence and abilities and their qualification. Beg your pardon? The people put us here. Beg your pardon, ma'am? Thank you, ma'am. The people put us here because they felt that we were capable. Show the people that they are capable. Show the people that they are capable. That's an early warning system. Yes. Yes. I come back to the technical aspects of this act, Your Honor. And I was at the point where I was saying that in a department previously run by a lawyer, a functionary called a lawyer, managed by that functionary called a registrar, that lawyer now sits in administrative subordinacy to a CEO. Having disclosed that, here is, I beg your pardon, here's what the legislation is saying about the CEO. And that is at section 13. Beg your pardon, ma'am. Section 12. Section 12. The functions of the registrar are explained, articulated at section 13 of the legislation, of the bill, and the functions of the chief executive officer are articulated at section 12. I don't think I read what are the functions of the registrar, but I'll read them, ma'am. The registrar is responsible for administering and ensuring compliance with this act and the specified enactments set out in the first schedule. B, advising the chief executive officer and the board on legal matters relating to the specified enactments referred to at paragraph A. So already we have an indication that the CEO doesn't have to be fixed with legal expertise because the registrar is advising him or her on legal matters. So that CEO can come with qualifications in business and accounts and related areas of human endeavor. As I've said before, the registrar has the power to initiate legal proceedings, and 13(1)(d), the registrar is responsible for doing any other act or thing required to be done by the chief executive officer. So there's no doubt, there is absolutely no doubt that the registrar is administratively, under this legislation, subordinate to the chief executive officer. And that chief executive officer does not have to be a lawyer because the registrar advises him or her on legal matters. I repeat, this is an opportunity for the government to insert at the top of that administration a chief executive officer who is not a lawyer, but who will be qualified. And I'm going to say it for the third time. We have a lot of qualified people in this Caribbean space. Find one! Find one! The functions of the Chief Executive Officer are articulated at Section 12. Not going to read all of them, but the one that may attract some interest and attention, and I bring this to the Honourable Member for St. James South, who introduced what is before us. Here is what Section 12, subsection 3 says, and this is pertaining to the functions of the Chief Executive Officer. Now, it says that the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, in the exercise of her or his functions, remains subject to the directions of the board. The board, not the minister, the board. But then it goes on to say, notwithstanding the fact that the CEO is subject to the directions of the board shall not give directions to the Chief Executive Officer, Registrar, Director of Intellectual Property, or any other person with respect to the administration of any of the specified enactments, and in particular, in the exercise of a function conferred or delegated under any of the specified enactments. That is limiting the power of the board in relation to the functions of the CEO, the registrar, the director of intellectual property, or any other persons within the administration. That's rather curious, though. You know, ma'am, you're experienced in government. You know that normally when you have a board, whether under a minister or otherwise, the persons in charge of the executive functions normally are subordinate and directly subordinate to the board. And often they will take directions from the board. Here's this legislation telling the CEO, the registrar, and the director that there are instances in which they are not subject to the directions of the board. Now, John Milton, many years ago, wrote a Paradise Lost. And the most famous quote from Paradise Lost was, is, rout on rout, ruin upon ruin, confusion worse confounded. Rout on rout, ruin upon ruin, confusion worse confounded. Here is an administrative design in which this legislation seems to be creating what I can only call petty sovereignties, petty fiefdoms. Everybody's going in their own direction. The CEO going to the left, the registrar going to the right, the board somewhere else off looking on because the CEO and the registrar, they're not obliged to take any directions from the board under this legislation in relation to certain matters. So I want to say to the government, and the criticism remains constructive. I don't care who is the draftsman. It matters not to me. I don't care who is the minister. I am indifferent to that. I am speaking law and administration. And I am saying that this legislation as presently constituted offers potential for confusion and disorder. The creation of petty sovereignties, petty fiefdoms within the administration that is contemplated. That this person doesn't have to take directions from that person, except that that person is a board. Perhaps a chairman of a board. Where are their teeth? So that I wonder if the government is so humble as to revisit this legislation. Not because anybody has been mischievous. I don't think anybody has been mischievous. But I think this well fits in with the Paradise Lost that John Milton wrote about. Route on route, ruin upon ruin, confusion worse confounded. And if there's any doubt, Your Honor, as to the possibility for confusion, the act seems to be creating the chaos explicitly. I take you, Your Honor, to section 10, subsection 2 of the legislation. Now that section 10 speaks as to the staff of Business Barbados and the establishment of divisions. So that it's quite reasonable that you will have and can have divisions within a corporation. Division of labor. And that John is responsible for that, Mary is responsible for that, but then they all report to the CEO, and the CEO becomes answerable or sits under the direction of a board. But I've demonstrated to you that this act itself is saying that in certain matters, no, the board cannot give directions in relation to certain important matters. So here's the potential for confusion. Here's the potential for chaos within an organization which is supposed to engender confidence in investors. That's where we are. And I listen to every word. And I listen to the noble intent of the honorable member for St. James South, who probably meant well. But when we begin to deconstruct and to dissect the legislation, it is a recipe for confusion. And that's why I quoted John Milton's Paradise Lost. I go back to section 10 of the legislation, man.
Madam Deputy Speaker.
Beg your pardon.
I'm a little concerned because I stand on a point of order. The honourable member is misleading the chamber, and I suspect he may have misled himself by not reading properly this bill. The bill clearly states that the Chief Executive Officer is subject to the board, and it clearly states, going to it now, in subsection 2 of section 12, it clearly states the Chief Executive Officer is in the exercise of the Chief Executive Officer's function subject to the directions of the board. Then in sections 13 and sections 14, where it outlines the functions of the registrar and the director of intellectual property, it says that where they have to deal with judicial matters coming from out of a law. That the same one that you read, subsection 2 of section 13, and it's in the same position for the Director of Intellectual Property, that if the law says X, Y, and Z, the board nor the CEO cannot tell the directors that they're not to do it. It is like what happens in a hospital. You have a chief executive officer, but that chief executive officer cannot call a doctor and tell the doctor how to administer, diagnose, prescribe, or deal with a patient. That is outside of the purview of the CEO. Now, I recognize that he may have thought it might cause confusion because they were unable to work out these matters in the Democratic Labour Party as to what was to happen with him in here and the other person being president, and they were confused, and it resulted in, and I understand his need for us not to fall into chaos, right? So I appreciate the concern, but I just want to reassure him that this legislation does not create chaos, for the simple reason that it ensures that when it comes to the law, that no one interferes with the directors who have to execute judgment on the law.
I was fully prepared to take the intervention seriously until the honorable member talked foolishness about George Street. Look, let's take this. Look, we are bringing legislation before the people of Barbados.
Honourable member, please.
Oh, I'm shouting too much for you, ma'am?
No, sir.
Oh,
Please do not accuse any honourable member here of talking foolishness.
of talking foolishness.
Yes, sir. We are
So
all
the
here.
reference made to George Street, isn't that foolishness when we are trying to debate a piece of legislation?
Honourable member, let us do it together.
Yes.
We're fighting
Yes.
the same cause.
Yes.
Or working towards the best result.
Yes.
But we are all here, honourable members. So please, watch your adjectives, sir.
Yes, I'll watch.
Thank
And
you.
the nouns too. And the nouns. Adjectives are nouns.
And the pronouns.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And I was indicating to the honorable member for St. James South that I was quite prepared to take the intervention seriously until, and this word will please you,
And you've been going well.
until it degenerated.
Don't spoil it.
Excellent word, isn't it, Your Honor?
Don't spoil it, sir.
Degenerated. And I was looking forward to the dialectical approach. The thesis, the antithesis, and hopefully we will arrive at the synthesis. And she doesn't have to be a communist to know that.
Honourable member, the honourable member.
In fact, I don't think she's a communist. Never has been. She's not even a socialist.
Will you continue, sir?
But she understands the dialectic. Now, when the honorable member attempted to clarify by reference to subsection 2, in which reads, the chief executive officer and this is subsection 2 of section 12. And she read that, and those who did not understand what she was saying applauded. And those who understood what she was saying remained silent. And here's what the honorable member was saying. That under the functions of chief executive officer, at subsection 2 it says, the chief executive officer is in the exercise of the chief executive officer's functions subject to the directions of the board. So that the honorable member made reference to that to contradict the point I was making. And the honorable member is saying to you, ma'am, and to this country, no. What he is saying is not true. This legislation says that the CEO is subject to the directions of the board. That is what it reads. But I brought the honorable member to the section, the subsection, which comes immediately after. And it is written in English, and I'm going to read it for her, and for you, and for the people of Barbados, ma'am. It says, notwithstanding subsection 2, which is what the honorable member read, the board shall not give directions to the CEO, registrar, director of intellectual property, or any other person with respect to the administration of any of the specified enactments, and in particular in the exercise of a function conferred or delegated by under any of the specified enactments. So that subsection 3 is an exception to the subsection that the honorable member read. It does not stop at subsection 2, Your Honor. The legislation goes on to provide for cases in which the registrar is not subject to the directions of the board. Now, if the honorable member say to this chamber and analogize with reference to professional undertakings that you can't, in other words, the CEO at the hospital can't tell a surgeon how to cut, that's an excellent analogy. And two persons to your left would confirm that. You can't tell the dentist how to go into your jawbone. You're only out at the front. You own the building and the dental place, but you can't come in there and tell the dentist how to pull out somebody's tooth. But my argument is that subsection 3, which creates the subsection, is vague. It is general. Read the last sentence. In the exercise of a function conferred or delegated under any of the specified enactments. A recipe of vagueness, cooking a meal of confusion. Route on route, ruin upon ruin, confusion, worse, confounded. So please leave George Street alone. If you're curious, come. You got on blue as it is anyhow. You're ready. Now this board, I'm taking the honorable member back to the legislation. Perhaps she made an excellent political speech. So do not be discomfited now that I take you into the technical aspects of the legislation. Ma'am, that's my training. And if the honorable member came here without the benefit of legal advice, I'm sorry. I can't be out here and out there too. And I'm trying to help the other side with some legal interventions.
You seem to be missing over here.
Something missing out there.
You seem to be missing. Come over.
Miss it? I see it and I miss it. I bypass it.
And you miss it.
I don't miss it in that sense.
Everyone smartly, sir.
You see how often I smile in here, man?
Because I'm here.
Well, apart from that.
The charm is
Well, I smile more when you're in the chair.
The charm is flowing over from
Yes.
you to me and me to you. Continue, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. You're very kind. The board of this new Business Barbados is established at Section 7 of the Act. It reads, there is established a board to be known as the Business Barbados Board, which shall be responsible for the policy, organization, and administration of Business Barbados. Now, this same board, that this legislation is telling that it is responsible for the administration of Business Barbados, this same board is told at Section 12, subsection 3, that although it is responsible for the administration of Business Barbados, it shall not give directions to high-level functionaries in certain circumstances. That is why I quoted John Milton. Look, it is one thing to write beautiful legislation. It is one thing for legislation to prescribe beautifully. But ma'am, you know how human beings are when they get involved in the process. People in this country apparently fight for car park space. And that's only a space outside to stop the car from getting the sun on the roof. People fight over car park space. You take well-meaning public servants and put them into this space. Into this space, where on the one hand you're telling them you're a law unto yourself. There are certain matters in which the CEO has no control over you, the board has no control over you. That's a human being. That's a human being, ma'am. You've worked with human beings in the school and in politics, and you know what we are like. I say we, am one. You know what we are like. In short, this act creates administrative confusion. And if the government doesn't wish to admit that, fine. But I'm not going to withdraw from my position. It creates administrative confusion.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not quite sure.
What do you
Rise on a point of order.
say, ma'am?
I'm not quite sure how long the honourable member will go on, and I don't really want the mischief to go out from here. The very same piece that he read in relation to the board, the chief executive officer, the section 3 of 12, notwithstanding subsection 2, the board shall not give directions to the chief executive officer or registrar. It is the same thing as you find in 13 and 14, which says, if there is a matter of law in which they are instructed that they must behave in a particular way, then the board cannot interfere with either of the three. The chief executive officer cannot interfere with either of the two. It does not create confusion unless he has no confidence in the professionalism and training of persons who take those positions to understand where their cutoff line is. I can assure you that there's no confusion at the hospital between the chief executive officer and giving instructions to anybody about medical matters. And there will be no confusion between the board or the chief executive officer pertaining to any matter that by law, chief executive officer, registrar, director of intellectual property, any law that instructs them how to act, they know what they have to do and what they cannot do. So I want him to be reassured. I know that he's struggling to find something to be pompous about, but you know.
Thank you for your point of
Perfectly
elucidation.
all right.
Thank you for your point of elucidation. Honourable member for Church.
I'm not sure whether it was a point of order, point of elucidation, but I accept it. Point of order. Thank you. Now, I don't think that the honourable member is contradicting me, since she is conceding that there are areas in which the CEO does not have to take directions from the board. She's conceding that. And I don't know if she's conceding this, but there are general words at the end of the subsection, and I will read the general words. In the exercise of a function conferred or delegated under any of the specified enactments. It is broad. They haven't listed them here. It is subject to the interpretation of the CEO. It is subject to the interpretation of the board. And all I'm saying to the honourable member is that there will be circumstances, human beings functioning as they are, will have their own interpretations as to what are their functions and as to who is trespassing. And any time you find legislation, Your Honor, and I want the honourable member to hear this, which presents vagueness in relation to conduct, to administrative conduct, it becomes subject to personal or individual interpretation. That's all I'm telling the honourable member, that this legislation is creating a recipe for confusion. And it does it at section 13, beg your pardon, it does it at section 12, subsection 3, and it does it at section 13, subsection 2. Subsection 12 refers to the functions of the Chief Executive Officer, and I will say it plainly. Section 12 tells the Chief Executive Officer that in certain circumstances, he or she is not subject to the directions of the board. It says that. You know, it goes on then, section 13, to the registrar. And it articulates the functions of the registrar. And then, as obtains with the Chief Executive Officer, this legislation also gives to the registrar an opportunity to say, but I am not answerable to the Chief Executive Officer. So you're here telling the Chief Executive Officer that there are circumstances, general or specific, you decide, in which he or she is not answerable to the board. Doesn't have to follow the directions of the board. You know, the same legislation in the next section goes on to tell the registrar that he or she, and they don't talk about directions now, they say is not answerable. And I'm going to read it, Your Honor. I'm going to read it for the honourable member for St. James South. You're hearing it for the first time when I spoke. We heard a beautiful speech about investment and trillions and all kinds of things. All kinds of things that don't exist in reality. What trillions are what? The only trillions you're talking about is reparations. Functions of registrar. Those functions of the registrar are articulated at section 13, subsection 1, A, B, C, and D. I want the honourable member for St. James South to listen to this carefully. When the legislation speaks of the functions of the registrar, it says at 13.1d that the registrar is responsible for doing any other act or thing required to be done by the Chief Executive Officer. Under functions, the registrar is told that he or she must do any other act or thing required to be done by the Chief Executive Officer. Here's what the next section says. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this act, but subject to subsection 1B and C, and any provision of the specified enactment in the first schedule, the registrar shall not be answerable to the Chief Executive Officer, the board, or the minister in the exercise of the duties, obligations, powers, or rights conferred on the registrar by any of the specified enactments in the same legislation. The legislation just tells the registrar that he or she must do any act or thing required to be done by the Chief Executive Officer. The section that follows immediately after that uses the word not answerable to. Not answerable to, section 13, subsection 2. Subsection 1 of section 13 says to the registrar, look, you have to abide by these responsibilities. And in abiding by these responsibilities, you must do any act or thing required to be done by the Chief Executive Officer. The very next section says to the registrar that she is not answerable to the Chief Executive Officer, the board, or the minister in the exercise of her duties, obligations, powers, or rights conferred on the registrar by any of the specified enactments. General, again, general words, swinging wide. So on the one hand, you have to say you have to do what the CEO tells you to do. In the very next section, you're not answerable to him in relation to enactments. What are these enactments? You see, legislation, you have a duty in doing legislation. They got a quorum in here. Do you have a quorum, ma'am? Beg your pardon?
We do.
You do. I like the public to know how things are here shaping up.
It's a good thing. You've never been here so long before, so you would not know. So we are happy that we're asking.
You know, they tell
and
me,
I'm gladly letting you know.
they come in here every week, man, he don't read the rules. He doesn't know the standing orders, and that's a recitation among them.
We do have more than a quorum.
He don't
We're
know the
all
standing
listening.
orders.
We're listening attentively to your.
So whenever I see these things, the public will know how they're behaving. Because on YouTube, they only got me. But if I talk about the other business that is going on in here, they tell me I don't know the standing orders.
We do have a quorum though, and if you leave, we will still have one.
They're all over Barbados on Tuesdays.
We will still have one.
All over Barbados on Tuesdays.
If you exit now, sir, we will still have a quorum.
If I do what, ma'am?
If you exit the building now, we will still have a quorum. But we're listening
if I
to you.
exited?
But we're listening to you attentively.
Well, let the public
So carry on,
understand
sir.
all this thing about standing orders.
No, we're not
I
allowed
can't come
it.
in here and tell the public.
That is your authority.
I can't come in here and tell the public how they're behaving.
Of course you do.
Right, I'm going to tell the public how they're behaving, and that's why I asked you if we have a quorum.
But we do have a quorum, sir, and if you
Right.
exit now,
Right.
we will still have a quorum.
Well, the public has heard that.
Therefore,
Because YouTube only focusing on the two of us.
let us continue with the focus.
Let us
with what we're
continue.
discussing. Yes, sir.
Let us continue. They want to misbehave, and the public must not know. Every time a plane takes off at Grantley Adams, you're struggling to get a quorum in here.
Honorable member, please do not reflect on that because it is not in keeping with what we know. Otherwise, there will be no sitting at this moment. We do exceed the numbers for a quorum. And you're casting aspersions now on my management, which would mean that I am denying, or excuse me, that I am not observing and directing this chamber in the way it should be managed. We do have a quorum.
It's just helping you with the count, ma'am. You know, I like to help you.
Sir, no man can help me, even especially a short man. It can't work. It can't work, sir. It can't work, sir. But let us carry on in good faith.
Let us carry on.
Yes,
with the
please.
paper.
Yes, please.
Let us carry on with the quorum that we have. Now, we were at the point when we were saying that the act appears to give powers to the board and to the CEO, and then the same act appears to be withdrawing those powers from the board and or the CEO by the use of the words, not answerable to, not subject to the directions. And that is why I believe my comment is fair and objective. I believe it is fair and objective that you are creating a situation for possible confusion, possible conflict, possible chaos. You are creating a situation of which John Milton wrote about in Paradise Lost. route on route, ruin upon ruin, confusion, worse, confounded. And which CEO will go up there and decide that he has a free hand? Let us not belabor the point. So that we spoke about the board and its functions. That board is established at section 7. And we need not read that. But what are the functions of the board? And those functions are mentioned at section 8, Your Honor. A to D establishes the functions of the board, or describes, I beg your pardon, the functions of the board. The board is established at section 7. There's no difficulty with that. But in terms of the functions of the board, that is contained at section 8 of the legislation. Here are those functions, Your Honor. The functions of the board are the appointment of staff to Business Barbados and the management thereof. I will go to C deliberately. The development of policies for the prudent and efficient management of Business Barbados. This is the board. Presumably, the board is a non-executive organ within Business Barbados. D, the monitoring of the performance of Business Barbados in respect of the discharge of its functions. Let us read that and consider it, because that is the function of most boards. So let us read it again, Your Honor. The function of this fourth function of the board is the monitoring of the performance of Business Barbados in respect of the discharge of its functions, supervisory, overviewing. And you know, ma'am, non-executive. We all know this, that boards tend to be non-executive. They only give them a little office, well, not a little office, they give them an office with a long table, 2 coffee machines, you get lemonade and cake, you go up there once a month, and depending on the quality of your chairmanship, I wouldn't say what they do. I will leave that alone. But boards are non-executive. They function as in a supervisory manner. They function to overview the work of the organization. And that is why that section is so apt. The monitoring of the performance of Business Barbados in respect of the discharge of its functions. But here this government has inserted another function. 8.1b. Now I suspect you, with your vast experience, ma'am, you know about boards and you know how boards function and you know the relationship between the minister and the board. The minister puts the board there to see that the thing is running well. And when you have board meetings, you bring the CEO, because the CEO gives account to the board on behalf of the executives and the organization generally. So that is the hierarchy. Minister, board, CEO. And boards are non-executive. As we assume that this board is non-executive, but here's 8.1b. Let us read it, Your Honor. The functions of the board are the management of the resources and contracts of Business Barbados. Now, in the presence of the honorable member who led off this debate, who has risen to her feet more than once to offer a point of elucidation, the member who is well steeped in business and administration, well steeped, this honorable member has made a name for herself in this polity. as someone well steeped in business. And if the honorable member does not rise to her feet again, we can conclude that she does not understand it or she has not read it. I will not accuse her of not understanding anything. I will not do that. I am not here to do that. But she has the opportunity, the honorable member has an opportunity to rise to her feet now or in response to say whether 81B is an executive function or whether it is a function normally associated with boards of management. I will read it again, 81B. The functions of this board include the management of the resources and contracts of Business Barbados. So when I quoted John Milton, they thought I was joking. You have a board that is now managing a board, ma'am. Non-executive persons, or are they? Because this seems like an executive function to me. That if you're managing contracts of Business Barbados, and if that is stipulated in the legislation expressly, it is there, it's not done by implication, that seems to me to be an executive function. So that when I accuse this government of bringing legislation here, which is in keeping with the fall of the angels into doom, further to what John Milton wrote, Paradise Lost, it seems that what we have now, we are going to lose it by this legislation. If it is paradise now, we are losing it. Because the registrar running up there now. But this government now proposes to institute a body where the various duties are vague and create confusion, route on route, ruin upon ruin, confusion, worse, confounded. And I say to this government, ma'am, that section 81B of the legislation fixes the board with an executive responsibility. Who will explain that? Who among this government, including the member that led off this legislation, who will explain that? I was interrupted several times. I welcome an interruption now. Not a word. Not a word. I press on. I invited it, not a word. Perhaps they'll explain it in the other place. Let us take them, Your Honor, to section 9. More confusion. The board may delegate such of its functions as it thinks expedient for the purpose of effectively transacting the business of the board to the chairman, a committee of the board, or the chief executive officer of Business Barbados. Now, you know, when you read things, people don't assimilate it all at the same time. But this one is saying to the board that I accuse under this legislation of usurping executive functions of the CEO by taking those functions unto itself, managing contracts. It now says that that board with those functions, and I again accuse them of giving a board executive functions, so they appear to withdraw from that and say to the board, oh, you may delegate such of your functions as you think expedient for the purpose of effectively transacting the business of the board. And when I say that this legislation is creating administrative confusion in that department, I mean it. Here is the evidence. You are giving duties to a board that it ought not to have. And I say they're executive functions. And then in the section that follows immediately after, you recognize that, you acknowledge that, and says to the board, okay, well, you may delegate those functions. In other words, hand them down to somebody else. Hand them down. according to their discretion. And here are the persons to whom that board fixing itself. Well, it doesn't fix itself. The legislation fixes it with that responsibility. And here is that board, having been fixed with executive functions, now being told that it can delegate, hand down some of those functions to these persons. The chairman. The chairman, ma'am, you have a board. How many people they have on the board? You have a board, ma'am, headed by chairman. And in the normal course of things, the board that offers supervisory functions to report back to the cabinet, to give account for the state of things. And you have an executive authority within the body, a CEO and three registrars, and other middle management people, and people at the lower level. And then you say to the board that it can delegate functions to a chairman. Ma'am, you understand what this legislation is doing to proper administration in Barbados? And they're walking about telling people that this is a platform for good business? Creating a lot of confusion in the people's place. That's what they're doing. But y'all don't leave the people alone, eh? Well, you don't come back with good legislation, beg your pardon? All right. I can take it, you know. I can take it. I can take it. I can take it, ma'am. Well, if I share lashes, I must expect some. They're not dead, you know. They're not dead. And I like to encourage them to speak because I know they don't speak on Thursdays. So that when they come in here on Tuesdays, man, and they're laughing and carrying on and thumping tables, not one of them can speak at a cabinet meeting. Not one. So laugh, my brothers. Enjoy yourselves. I am helping their therapeutic exercise. I want them to speak. Sometimes there are times when I thought they had lost the ability to speak. So I like when they're shouting at me, and you realize, ma'am, I don't even object. I love them. And it is because I love them that I want to see them happy.
I believe they want you to focus on some of the benefits of the same legislation.
And if
instead of that
Tuesdays,
particular,
yes, ma'am.
And we'll pay attention to that.
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
They're worthy of love. And I demonstrate my love by encouraging them to speak on Tuesdays. Give me a call on Thursday and tell me how you're doing, though. Thursday night, tell me how the day was. Can't say a word.
It seems as though you want to come back home.
Can't say a word.
We love you dearly. Continue,
you love me
sir.
too, ma'am.
Continue, your honorable member.
Well, let us keep this climate of love. And let me accuse them, this government, not them, let me accuse this government of creating confusion, of bringing legislation here which is saying to a chairman of a board that he can ask his board to delegate executive functions to him as chairman. That is dangerous. That is very dangerous. But that is in keeping with what is emerging in Barbados in recent times. Authoritarianism. Man, why y'all don't let the board function? And if you pick your favorite chairman, you can telephone him and tell him, look, ignore the board, delegate that to yourself. Take hold of that. That is what this legislation is saying. We have a matter up there that we want you to take into your own hands. And they know that what I'm saying is correct. They know that this is empowering a minister. Just like the utilities regulations did empower a minister and marginalize the Fair Trading Corporation. That's what this government is about. But I don't accuse These ones in here, we know where it is coming from. And I'm not afraid to say it. They could curse me. They could tell me all kinds of things about myself. But they're going to hear the truth. And I ain't cursing one of them. Nor that one. I'm not going to curse that one. And here's not for that. Let me proceed, ma'am. May I proceed, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
So here's a board permitting the chairman to take on executive functions. I make no apology for saying that. Or the legislation is telling the board that it may delegate those executive functions to a committee of the board. What are they proposing to do with the lives of these public servants? And they go farther. They're saying to the board that it may give some of its functions to the chief executive officer. So that here you have an organization that is supposed to be running harmoniously, and the chairman of a board or both is being permitted to extract from within the organization certain persons and giving those persons those functions. That is why I spoke of human nature. That you have an organization with proper divisions of labor, proper divisions of administrative involvement. And you picking out some people and saying, I want you to do so and so. Whether it is mischief or not, I want you to do it. And the legislation itself says contracts, dealing with contracts. Dealing with contracts. And the public of Barbados knows how sensitive is the issue of awarding contracts. The public of Barbados knows how serious and sensitive is the issue pertaining to the award of contracts by government. Government is the single richest corporation in this country, collects millions of dollars per week. No other business in Barbados located in Barbados makes as much profit as government. And so that when government begins to award contracts, it can award lucrative contracts not to its enemies, but to its friends and families. And recently they've been adding another word, but that is not for here. Indeed not. So why do you think this legislation is removing the question of contracts away from the CEO, away from the registrars, and giving it to the board? And even then, it is removing the issue of those contracts from the board and telling the board that it may ask the chairman or the CEO to deal with the matter of contracts individually. And unless there's an opposition to come in here and point at these things, the public believes that this is just another piece of corporate legislation. Let it slide. That there's nothing untoward about it. But here's the legislation itself. And I'm going to read it again so that the public, who drafted this? And I don't blame the draftsman, because the draftsman is not the author. The draftsman is only a servant. I want to know who is the author of this. And looking at you in here, I suspect that not one of you is the author. I suspect that all of you in here are the beneficiaries of what I am disclosing. That it is eminently possible that none of you knows that this legislation is permitting a board to select a chairman or a CEO to deal with the matter of contracts. You did not know. You are not the authors.
On a point of order, Madam Chair, the honourable member is clearly misleading the House. Nothing at all in the legislation stops the requirement for any contracts to go through procurement. And for the honourable member to suggest that this is some way to circumvent procurement and the procurement legislation is clearly an attempt to mislead this honourable House. No part of this legislation suggests that.
I am obliged to the honourable member for Christchurch West for that intervention. By way of clarification, I said not a word about procurement. The legislation speaks of the management of the resources and contracts. Contracts! Not a word about procurement. So that I'm not going to accuse the member of going ahead of me and clearing the government in terms of procurement. We're all grateful for that clarification, but I am speaking about the management of contracts. And if the member wishes to clarify, he can get up and say to the court what is his interpretation of the management of contracts. The honourable member is free to get up and say whether the management of contracts includes the award of contracts or the price of the contract. How much you're paying your family or your friend, or bringing it down to the level that it needs to be at. What is the definition of the term management of a contract? Why can't the CEO or the board deal with that? Why? So, honourable member, to you, ma'am, I am not venturing into procurement. I am asking why this legislation allows a chairman, independently of his board, to deal with the management of contracts. It is there, section 8(1)(b). The public will now ask the question, when this bill becomes the law, I want the public of Barbados to remember section 8(1)(b) of this legislation, which gives a chairman or a CEO, and I'm going to focus on the chairman, acting by himself. Who is the author, honourable member? Not you. Not one of you. Who is the author? Don't answer that. Lose your pick. I will close by saying to the people of Barbados, through you, ma'am, that when this bill becomes an act of parliament, go and ask the government to explain section 8(1)(b) of the legislation. I have dealt with the administration of things that could create confusion, but there's another C word that seems to be embraced by this legislation. And I challenge any member of this government on the other side to get up and tell the people of Barbados that there's a similar provision in any legislation which allows the chairman to act independently of the board in relation to the management of contracts. Point to it. Point to it and I will accept. I can't think of it. All of us in here have been chairmen and chairwomen of boards. And I have never encountered similar legislative permission. I've never encountered it. But the honourable member for St. James Central did say that we are talking here about trillions of dollars coming in. St. James South, I beg your pardon. South. What Norfolk? St. James South. I apologize. In fact, she is due a great apology. Greater than she may understand.
Lots of men give him an apology.
Beg your pardon?
Lots of men have to give him an apology.
No,
If you want to make that apology now, sir, please.
The apology is for the honourable member for St. James South, who will sit there and say, but how could he do that? to me. I apologize. Yes, ma'am. So the public will be asked again to ask this government about Section 81B of this legislation. I press on, ma'am. I press on. The author can get vexed with me and tell me all kinds of things about myself. All kinds of things. And I sat down here, ma'am.
Your back is broad.
Broad.
But you can take it.
Because I'm doing my job.
As has been
I
researched.
am doing my job.
But then you, sir.
Came a little rough last week. And I sat here. I hear things about myself that I did not know. I did not know these things of myself. That,
You know, sir, in politics you get a lot of that.
Yeah,
But let us keep the focus
they prepare
on the matter
videos
under
for
discussion, and then we could talk outside.
I should be in Queen's Park, still shedding all kinds of things. Why? All I could do is laugh, tell the truth. So, ma'am, I will not be deterred. I will press on. Now, normally when you are corporatizing a department of the public service, there will be issues related to the continuation of that service and the rights and privileges and so on. And that always will be a concern for those who continue. Now, the legislation, and this is not controversial, the legislation itself speaks as to that continuation, and it seems to be given an option to those good young men and women who work there. The legislation seems to be saying to them that they can continue on secondment, in other words, they continue as public servants, or that they can leave the public service and take full-time employment with this place called Business Barbados, which is going to bring in trillions of dollars into this country if we are to take the honorable member for St. James South at her word. We await those trillions of dollars. You see, we accuse the government of sweet talk. And it is not an accusation that is without foundation or merit. Because if you bring this legislation here today and you're saying to the people of Barbados that by this single stroke, there are trillions of dollars out there somewhere hiding behind a rock in the Middle East or Japan. And as soon as you pass this legislation, trillions coming in. And when people in Barbados say that these people talk is sweet and not delivering, they get vexed. They get vexed. But I wish the honorable member had not said that this morning, that this legislation will unleash the trillions of dollars that are looking to come from under that rock and come into this country and find investment and make trillions upon trillions of dollars. Let us come back to the bread and butter of the legislation. Let us not be fanciful. Let us not tell the people of Barbados fairy tales about this legislation. We've already told the people of Barbados not the fairy tale, but the horror story that is contained possibly at 81B. I don't want them to forget it. And those who did not know of its existence will leave here today and ask the author, how could you put that in there and not tell us anything? They could curse me next week or today. Again. So I was saying to you, ma'am, that the legislation offers employment by way of secondment or fresh employment with this entity. I will not want to be one advising anyone there. I don't come here to give legal advice. I come here in parliamentary tradition to ensure that laws are proprietous. I am now going to bring the public to Section 16 of the Act. Which again limits the board. I spoke about the limitations on the registrars, the limitations on the CEO, the limitation on the board itself. This would not be complete. My dissertation will not be complete unless I come to Section 16 of this Act, of this bill, Your Honor. Section 16 says, well, it has a rubric, it has a heading which says, limitation on powers of the board concerning staff, etc. I wonder why. I wonder why they're not giving the board its usual powers in relation to staff. You know, ma'am? Well, let me tell you what the legislation says. Notwithstanding the powers conferred on the board by Section 8, which is the one I just read. So they're telling you the legislation is now saying, and I'm going to say it in a way that we all understand it. It does not matter what Section 8 says. Listen to Section 16. The board shall not, without the prior approval of the minister, assign to a post established by Business Barbados a salary in excess of such amount per annum as the minister may determine. So that, I'm not going to read it exhaustively. Section 16 is saying to the board that in relation to certain matters concerning staff, hold your horses. Hold your horses. You may be a board. But when it comes to assigning posts, appointing persons to posts established by Business Barbados, and the other one, providing for the payment of pensions, gratuities, and similar benefits, hold your horses, board. And it says to the board, hold your horses, because this is now time for the minister. This is now time for political power. You are corporatizing a department of government. You are giving, presumably, fullest powers to a board and a CEO. And when it comes to certain matters concerning the staff, hold your horses. It is now time for ministerial power to be displayed. Hold your horses, board. It is now time for the exercise of political power. And this legislation proposed wishes to claim that it is pursuing corporatization. This is not in the nature of corporatization. Let the corporation be run by its corporate executives and its board. Butt out, minister. Butt out. If you're corporatizing the thing, you still want to choose the staff. You still want to determine who are the experts, and I use the word expert, and the act itself, the bill itself, speaks of experts. Here is where it speaks of experts. Section 18. So that Section 16 is saying to the board, I'm going to repeat it. Section 16 is saying to the board, what they call it? Barbados what? Business Barbados. We're establishing you as a corporation. Run your business. Run your business. But some clever politician has determined that matters involving the staff are to be dealt with by the minister. And you tell me, and you tell this country that you're corporatizing. You're not corporatizing. You are colonizing. You are continuing to keep your long political tentacles deep within the organization. You're not corporatizing, you're colonizing. Decide now whether this legislation intends to corporatize or whether it intends to colonize. And if it gives power to a minister in relation to staffing matters, staffing, the engine room, the place that runs the organization, the place that gives it life, the engine room, the personnel. You got a board, you got a CEO, you got registrars who know people's expertise, and a minister is still inserting himself within the organization in relation to staffing, even on the matter of expertise. Ma'am, I use the word expertise. The act itself speaks of expertise. Section 18, turn your pages, turn your pages. Appointment of experts. Come, children, turn the pages. The heading of this bill reads appointment of experts. You were a teacher for many, many years, and I'm only quoting you. Turn your pages, children. Section 18. They cursed me in here last week. They called me all kinds of names. All kinds of names. And I can't exchange a term of endearment. Somebody now going for the standing orders. He can call us, he can say that. I apologize. I apologize. You used to say in Holy Innocents, it was, turn your page, children. Sharon, an even better school. Beg your pardon?
Holy Innocents.
Oh, the alma
My
mater.
education. Sharon Pioneers.
Yes.
All of them are excellent.
Yes. You've made a wonderful contribution to the development of this country. No, I'm way behind you. I defer. I defer. Section 18 deals with the appointment of experts. Business Barbados may appoint on such terms and conditions as the minister approves, such experts as it considers necessary to assist it in such manner as it determines. I made this reference earlier, ma'am, and I'm going to make it again. This legislation at Section 18 is given to the government, whether it is a 27-person government or a one-person government. It is given to the government the right to decide who are the experts on this globe. And when I say echoes of BTMI and QEH and HOPE, and there are a few others, but I'm not ready to talk about them yet because they think that the people in Barbados don't know. They think I don't know. I would say it so that my colleagues in here, my parliamentary colleagues would know, but I don't want them to know yet. There are people working for this government, and my colleagues, whom I love so much, don't know who is working for the government. They have consultants in this government, and my colleagues don't know. So I don't abuse them. I don't abuse them. But here is Section 18. I will read it again. Business Barbados may appoint on such terms and conditions as the minister approves, such experts as it considers necessary to assist it in such manner as it determines. They're determining the manner, or they're determining who are the experts. Echoes of BTMI. We heard about the hate hunting. We heard of a hate hunting. They went in the Far East. They went to the Far East and they brought the best brain. I heard that during the estimates. They brought the best brain to this country. Not a fella in Barbados can remember his name. Not a man can remember his name. They remember the slogan that we paid $500,000 for, though. This country spent, was it 500,000 US or Barbados? Whatever it is, it's a lot of money. Experts in legislation, that a minister determines who is an expert, and that a minister determines which expert is to be hired, whether from Japan or Australia. As I said, echoes of BTMI. And this country spent hundreds of thousands of dollars pursuing experts. And now this legislation is encouraging the same mistake. This legislation is encouraging the same mistake. $500,000 for a slogan. Lots of money to recolonize Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. and calling it expertise. And now this legislation is pursuing the same path of expertise. Mona closed down. St. Augustine closed down. I know K-Phil is open. And I know that it is time that this government gives some respect to the bright young people in Barbados who are capable of running our public entities, whether they're corporatized or whether they are part of the established public service. Come here telling me foolishness about I should be in Queen's Park and all that. I'm insincere. The people in Barbados are insincere for their protests against injustice, against murdered ambitions, while our young people are forming a long queue to the Toronto airport. We are bringing experts into this country and telling our young people that these are the best minds. And we don't have good minds in this country. We didn't have good minds when they populated this place with 30 of us. That is the only time this government pauses for expertise, to ask people to make them a government. We are here at the will of the people, and we must serve the interests of the people, and we do disservice to the interests of the people of this country when we can't take up the 25-year-old or 35-year-old or 45-year-old children and give them opportunities to do these jobs. I beg your pardon, Your Honor. I beg your pardon for this emotional exhalation. And I'm not acting. I feel strongly about these things. You know how much this country did for me, man? You know that if I were born in Missouri or New York, the son of working class people, I couldn't be in a legislative body. My parents would have had to have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in an American system. America the Great and the Beautiful has not been so great and beautiful for a lot of poor people's children. And the greatness and the beauty of this country, ma'am, is that the poorest, the most humble, those out of Nazareth have occupied the highest offices in this country, whether it is a government or a corporation. And I defy this government to any time in the future deny our young people the chance to head our corporations. Don't tell me about any Queen's Park. Every one of you in here feels strongly about this. Every one of you. With a few exceptions, apparently. with a few exceptions, and I'm not going to still my voice on it. K-Phil closed down. This is a region that produced 2 Nobel Prize winners, and not a region, a small rock called St. Lucia. And we have a gentleman living in this country who showed the world that what he was good at, he was best at it. And he was better at that than anybody had done anything else. Bayland, he rambled Bayland barefooted. And that is why I rejoice with every day of his life. Every day that I hear that he still has breath in his body, a living example of the emancipation of those who came out of Nazareth. We have to remind this government, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And the scripture says, come and see. Come and see. I beg your pardon? Much longer? If you get me more vexed, I can give you another hour of this. I'm wrapping up now. Wrapping up now. You hungry?
Honourable member, please.
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 Talking to me.
Please, honourable member. Do not mind the aside, sir. Please continue your
Thank you,
discussion.
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And I was talking about BTMI. And I want the people of Barbados to remember that this government betrayed the educated young people in Barbados when they found, in the words of this legislation, an expert. Don't tell me I acting. A real vex. And the people of Barbados vex. And if I acting, them acting too, but y'all gonna find out that they're not acting. The time is coming, you know. The time is coming. And if you thought that BTMI was an accident, recently corrected, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And I don't attack people personally, but I have not heard anything that I did not hear before. I thought we were going to discover, ma'am, I thought we were going to discover some large nugget of gold in Martindale's Road. I thought so. Well, with hope, that's a different matter. That's a different matter. And I disclosed earlier this year that this government is so steeped in its betrayal of people that they were taking up foreign dollars and paying to these experts. Before man got into this country, before he had a work permit, this government was taking up pounds sterling and paying him into a bank account in England. While little children were walking up to K-Phil with only lunch money and a piece of bus fare.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I raise on a point of order.
There's a point of order, sir.
To correct a statement made in respect of the appointment of the BTMI. The Honourable Member for Christchurch South is waxing warm and wide, but I just want to correct the record. I'm not sure in respect of the statement made, if it's made in its current relevancy or it relates to prior actions, but I just wanted the country to be aware that the CEO of the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. is indeed a Barbadian. I presume the Honourable Member is speaking about the past. So I just wanted to, on the floor of Parliament, just make it known that the current holder of the office of Chief Executive Officer is indeed a young Barbadian female. And I just thought I would enter that into the record just in case it ought to be corrected so the impression does not go that is not the case. I hate to interrupt the Honourable Member, but I just wanted to make that point for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member St. Michael Lessage.
I respect the intervention, and the Honourable Member, in spite of this microphone, he probably sits too far from me, because he would have heard me say that a head hunt was done And it was an appointment which was not a good appointment, and an appointment only recently corrected. Correct, yes, and I credit you. Because I know you have respect for merit. Yes, I know that. And it will not stop me from saying that the appointment before your time, Honorable Member for St. Michael West Central doesn't have to worry. He has respect for merit. And I said, the record Hansard will reflect that I said, it was an appointment only recently corrected. And when I say that, I meant that they reached into this Caribbean community, and more particularly this Barbadian community, and found someone of Barbadian merit. Honorable Member, I'm grateful. And I spoke of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I've never met the party. I don't even know the party's name. I am not discussing personality, I'm discussing a principle. A principle in which this government continues to question the national self-worth. And that is why I asked the question, this government closed down Kfil, this government closed down Mona, this government closed down St. Augustine. A little poor fellow or poor girl can't get a job. As an expert, Honorable Member for Christchurch West can leave here today and do the best and most successful dental practice. But he chose to do this. Whatever he is good at, he chooses to do. And there are thousands of young people out there who would like to make that choice. Again, I am warning this government that when it is choosing the CEO for Business Barbados, and when it is choosing the experts for Business Barbados, look inside this Caribbean first. And I don't want to do a head count and breach the standing orders, but I know that every member in this house presently agrees with me. But I also know your circumstances. I know both. And I'm going to tell the people of Barbados through you, ma'am, what are those circumstances? And I accuse them of talking a lot in here. But on Thursdays, not a word. Well, I want them to start talking on Thursdays. I want them to introduce this government, of which they are a collective part, to justice. And you don't arrive at the destination of justice unless you travel the rocky road of truth. Truth is a very rocky road. In speaking the truth, you have to sacrifice a lot. I heard last week that I am grateful. I heard that in here last week. I am ungrateful. I'm going to use the old people's language now. Because I get a little tralia, means that I must stop telling the truth in my Barbados. I heard that last week, ma'am, in your absence. From that place where you are, that I am grateful. So I am to get a little tralia and become complicit in mendacity. I'm going to use words deliberately, because I was also told last week that I use a lot of big words, well, I can use them. I will not, for a little tralia, become complicit in mendacity at the expense of the rights, interests of the people of this country. I'm not going to do it. And I don't belong in those circumstances anymore. And I have no regrets. Not one. Not one. And this is not to make a judgment of anyone in those circumstances. Every man got a right to determine his own destiny. They like Bob Marley, I commend that line of Bob Marley's. Every man got a right to determine his own destiny. I'm wrapping up. I'm wrapping up. I will alleviate the discomfort. I will alleviate it. Those who are hungry shall be fed very shortly. But I wanted to nourish your spirit with the truth. As to this legislation, and as to the possible sinister aspects of this legislation, don't accuse any of you of being the author. Who the cap fit, let them wear it. They like Bob Marley. Man to man. You want the whole thing, Your Honor? It's so unjust. You don't know who to trust. Let us come back to the legislation more particularly, ma'am. And let me say that I would ask this government to revisit Section 16 of this legislation, which is allowing the minister on behalf of the government to encroach, to trespass on a corporation in terms of the quality of persons who classify as experts. The persons best qualified to know expertise and to appreciate the expertise that is needed for the corporation are the persons who work there, whether as chief executive officer, as registrar, or as chairman and board. What minister what? What minister what? I'm going to go back to it in closing. I've heard your appeals of hunger. I've heard them.
Honorable member, please. Please.
Echoes of the man that was recruited from the Far East. Well, not Far East, it's the East, because I don't know what the Far East is far from. Echoes of QEH, still echoing. Echoes of hope, which is more despair than anything else. I'm very serious, not acting. This is genuine anger. But I'm not supposed to come here and be angry. But what I will say to this government is that the people out there are angry. The people out there are angry. And I want my colleagues to know it. And they're not angry because they hate any of them. They're angry at the indifference that this government is showing to the rights of people. And this legislation today, one would not think that corporate legislation would expose or reveal government's indifference, but it does. In that section where it says that a minister has the right now in this country to determine who is the expert that is to go and work at Business Barbados. Leave, if you're corporatizing, corporatize. If you want to colonize, do that. But don't try to do both. And the legislation is not doing both. The legislation is purporting to corporatize. But the effect of the legislation is for governmental colonization of this entity that is supposed to be called Business Barbados. The business of the government in this regard is wrong. It is immoral. It is wrong and it is immoral. Give to the young people of Barbados their due. Render to the young people of Barbados their due. Give them respect. Stop them from forming the queues into Toronto. This government doesn't understand that that is the effect of the denial of young people in this country. This government does not understand that. And I want this government to understand that they should take this legislation back and redraft it in a manner that reflects the interests and the entitlements of the young people of this country. Experts what? We have seen the examples. I'm going to repeat it. We've seen the examples of distorted concepts of expertise and who is suffering, who is paying a high price. And I will say this in closing, that it is clear that this so-called Bureau Barbados will constitute a greater expense to the government than is presently constituted by the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office. The cost to run Barbados business, or Business Barbados, whatever they call it, will be far higher. But of course, the people are going to be told, oh man, this is a new bright and shining object. So accept the higher costs. But unless they do what they must do and do it properly, the efficiencies or the inefficiencies to which the member for St. James South referred will continue, if there are such inefficiencies. But what this government will do, this government will create another expensive organization on pretty talk. Pretty talk. That is Barbados's biggest industry now, pretty talk. And the industrialist is the government. Everything is pretty talk and no results. Not a result. And this corporation is threatening to become another expensive undertaking of the government. If there are problems in there, fix the problems. No corporatization headed by whom they probably intend to head it will solve the problems. It threatens to be another massive expense. And I don't say that without the evidence. Because, ma'am, it is worth repeating that this country paid $500,000 for a few words. For a few words, a slogan. You got poor people running about this country can't buy a chicken. And this government took up the taxpayers' money in the tune of $500,000 and pay some people in New York to string together less than 10 words. Less than 10 words, a slogan. And that is why I say that this government is Barbados's sole industrialist in the manufacturing of pretty talk. And I don't say that because I can, the evidence is there. $500,000, $500,000. How many people that could have employed? But we employed the best minds up in New York. According to them, the best minds. Some genius mind came up with less than 10 words. And they expect people in Barbados not to be angry at them. $500,000. I don't even remember the nonsense that was written. They're not using it anymore. And the people of Barbados will remember that in its aftermath, this government set up a committee of 18 persons, having wasted the taxpayers' money. Like how they intend to waste it on this corporation. Came up with some council or commission to come up with a slogan. Ma'am, have you heard the likes of that? You were a teacher, ma'am. And you had young minds in your charge, teaching them to think creatively. And a government can justify its action when it gives $500,000 to somebody to come up with a slogan, and in the aftermath of dismal failure, the government sets up a commission. You drag up 18 people, put them around the table to come up with a slogan. Where's the slogan, Minister? It happened before your time, Honorable Member for St. Michael West Central. You have so much of a burden. And in having a burden, you have to unburden yourself of the nonsense that occurred in this country prior to your ascent to the Ministry of Tourism. A lot of nonsense they walk about this country doing, spinning left, right, and center. And then come and telling people, oh, we have a commission now. And they will come up with a slogan and tell me don't come in here and talk. Tell me don't come in here and talk, and if I talk, I am grateful. What you give me? What is I got? Well, whatever I got. Whatever it is I got. Perhaps a little Australia. But I will continue to speak the truth. And I will continue to remind the people of this country that this is a government of squandermania. Whether 1 or 27, there's squandermania. Man, abort last week. Abort last week. Not a word. Because this parliament must continue to be a place of dignity. And these personal attacks are not in keeping with the best of traditions. They're not. It is within the finest tradition of this parliament that this government must give account to the people of Barbados. And that everything that it does, it must consider that my responsibility is to scrutinize, analyze, criticize, and if necessary, chastise, and I will not resile from that public responsibility that I have under the Constitution of this country. You can heckle me about George Street till you can't heckle no more. It matters not to me. You can tell me all kinds of things about myself. Does not hurt me. You can try to silence me with insult. Does not stop me. Because unless I am visited with some grave misfortune, look for me next Tuesday. And look for me every Tuesday after that. Because somebody in this country has a responsibility to tell the truth about the nonsense that this government is doing. And there are hidden aspects within this legislation that reflect the nonsense, the injustice that is visited on the lives of the people of this country every day by a silent government. A silent government, but deadly. But deadly. Let us all go and eat. I'm obliged to you, ma'am.
Honourable Member for Christchurch. Yes?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this honourable chamber be now suspended until 3:30 p.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be now suspended until 3:30 p.m. All other honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This honourable chamber is now suspended until 3:30 p.m. today.